Welcome to MDV, The Blueprint. I am your host, Michael Della Vella. We have a great conversation today. We are going to speak with a good friend of mine, a new colleague, a full disclosure, we went to high school. We went to junior high and high school together, kind of reunited. We actually worked together in our 20s or 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I think it was. Yeah. And then reunited when our boys became friends, which was, that's coming full circle. So without further ado, I want to introduce my dear friend, Jimmy Doyle.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's nice to be here.
Jimmy, you have such a fascinating story and life history. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about you?
Oh, how can I start? I would say, Michael, that I'd like to tell you I've always had some kind of adversity in my life, right? So for example, I am dyslexic. So rewind back to sixth grade. And do you remember the times when we used to have groups of people that were really good readers and really bad readers, and we would all have to read in front of the class?
Absolutely.
And so I would be there with dyslexia, undiagnosed.
So you didn't get diagnosed till after sixth grade?
After sixth grade. And it was a substitute teacher that actually diagnosed me, which is funny, that started recognizing it. So I would have to stand up in front of the class with with years of anxiety and things about this problem and literally read in front of people. And my dyslexia it's many different ways, but I'll see the third letter first of a word, then the first. I'll see the third word first in a sentence. And so it slows me down. And because of that, I literally had a hard time just functioning. And when you lay that on, it starts to make you feel like you are less than, right? So imagine you're fifth, sixth grade, you're having a hard enough time just adjusting, and because of the way you read, it makes it sound like you're not intelligent, and it was difficult. And so that's really where I started with adversity. And after being diagnosed, I was able to start slowing down and learning that I can overcome this, right? That it took me a little bit longer, but it wasn't the way I thought. It wasn't my brain. I was still smart enough to interact with people and get good grades. I just had to do it differently than other people. And that helped me. It just helped me be a little bit more prepared. And translate that to today. I am a touch-at-once guy who loves getting things done, who, could really focus because of years and years and years of having to do things slower than everybody else. Now I do them really well and can function really at a high level, and I love it, right? I don't think I'd ever get there without that. Later on in life, I was 16 years old when I really started with this, but I started drinking heavily.
At what age?
12 was the first time I ever got. 12.
Really?
12, yeah. Believe it or not, it was a caddy at a country club, and it was a special day. So one of those days where there's clowns on the courses, and some of the holes are this big, and it really was just an excuse to have a good time with your friends that you went, that you were members with. And I was a caddy, and I started off just running next to the cart, and one of the guys in the cart said, "Here, this one's for you." We put a beer in the front, and he goes, "Just have a sip and leave it there. Don't walk around with it." And so I'm running along the cart, checking balls, making sure they don't lose their ball, holding a pin, doing that kind of stuff. And I know he didn't realize, but I kept replacing it. I kept finishing the beer and then putting another one right back where it was when they weren't looking. And believe it or not, on the 18th hole, I was sitting in his seat and he was running next to the cart. And when I got done, this will give you an idea. When I got done, my thought of that was he said to me, hey, just go back to the caddy yard and wait before you go home. Because he knew I was drunk, and he didn't want to get in trouble. I'm a 12-year-old kid, And he just said, wait till you feel normal. And I got to tell you, for the first time in my life, that was the last thing I wanted to feel. Because up to that point, I was probably 5 feet tall, 98 pounds. I was a little guy. I was out there at 12 years old with 18-year-olds, that were caddies about to go out to play football for colleges, big guys, I always felt a little less than, a little slower, everything. But that day, man, I was the king of the caddy yard. I felt different. I loved the feeling that I had. And because of my brain, I chased that feeling every day after that. Now, it wasn't until I was about 16 that I really had the opportunity to do that more. So,
wow.
So I just to fast forward, you and I have been in real estate pretty much for our whole lives. And I started out at one point where I needed a job because I had hurt my back. I actually spent a year and a half going from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane.
When we were at Realty One together?
I was 25 years old when it happened to me.
This.
Just an injury to my back that was bad. No one could operate. There wasn't a way to fix it. I spent 5 days in the hospital, unable to move my legs and in extreme pain. The day back from the hospital, I spent 8 hours on the ground, believe it or not, because I had my wife was at work. I had to get out of the bed, and I fell between the wheelchair and the bed. And I couldn't move for 8 hours. That was amazing to me, right? Just things that you remember in your life. So it took me a long time to get to this point where I am functional again, right? And but it was a big part of my life. And so at that point, I needed a new way to make a living, and that's when I started in real estate. So it was 1995, and I got licensed.
About right.
And
you were licensed before I was, because when I joined the office, you were already established, and I just joined.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know, that was why. Why did I got into real estate was that. And I did that until 2001. And then in 2001, I started I got a position as a managing director of a real estate department for a large corporation, and started that journey. Did that for 25 years. Today I'm back as a realtor, able to provide services to the public, and full circle. I'm right back to where I was before.
It's 100% full circle, man. And I had the pleasure of being a young agent with you, and you were very smooth. You were very articulate. You knew what you were doing at that time. I had just gotten my license, but I had been in the building business. So I, watched you, and you were very charismatic and did a great job of networking. But then you work for the corporation, and you're still doing real estate. And I had the pleasure of working with you. And with what you're doing, you are so knowledgeable and bring so much to the table to buyers or sellers. So I think and we'll call it the new era of real estate that is coming, I think you're going to absolutely just kill it. And just it's the value that you bring that is what people are looking for today. And
I have had what's interesting is I never would have had the opportunity. For example, I got the opportunity to do oil and gas leases. Who gets the chance to do that in Ohio?
And it's written on a contract. And when you said that you do that, I remember no, it's a disclosure. Are there any oil or gas rights to the property? Never thought of it, but you know all about it.
And it's not like I'm an expert in oil and gas leases, but I probably did 100 transactions, over my 23 years of doing that. I did a couple cell phone towers when they were first coming out. Can you believe that? That's just crazy.
People have asked me about that stuff. Know nothing about either one of them.
Yeah.
And all the years that 28 plus years I've been in the business, It's never crossed my path.
I managed
And then
a series of billboards, for example, just strange pieces of real estate. It was a combination of everything, including residential homes, large industrial complexes, build out for commercial property. Did the largest Walmart at the time in Ohio. Really, I did a flat in London, a vacation property in the Bahamas, St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Do you remember just a couple years ago when the island got hit with the hurricane that destroyed, and I'm trying to think of the name of the island, but we had this house, and imagine this for a second. On the hill is, when you would normally look at it from the water pretty far away, you couldn't see anything. It was just all trees. It was beautiful, right? And then after this hurricane came through, everything was destroyed except for one house, and that happened to be the house that I managed for a client. And it was white, and it stood out like this beacon, which was funny because we could not sell that property before that. It was very difficult. Because the market was different, and there were other competing properties. But the day after that, one of the neighbors bought that house.
Okay.
At full price. Yeah, because it was the only property left on the market. So that was pretty neat. Just interesting. A lot of interesting transactions over the years, just that you don't usually get as a local realtor.
So now you're starting a new venture. It, again, you're familiar with it, but it doesn't, as you know, doesn't come without challenges. But from what I know of you and your story, and I want you to share this, is, to me, you're fearless now. There's really nothing that you can't overcome. I'm sure you think this, that I can do this. You can do anything. You've made yourself that way. Maybe I'm misspeaking of my interpretation of where I'm going with this topic, but do you understand what I'm trying?
I absolutely understand it. What's great is I love that you're seeing me like that.
Oh, yeah.
Because internally, like all of us, I have doubts, I have fears, I have all of that, right? And we never know that when we're talking to somebody. Someone looks all put together and everything's great, but inside you peel enough layers. That's something I have to overcome every day, the same as you do, right? But yes, because of my past, so mainly because of my addiction to alcohol and drugs, that's where I had to learn how to overcome. What is normal for you, Michael, when you're in your life without having an addiction like I do? You can do just about whatever you want. Me, it brings anything that is frightening or anxiety or resentful or envious, brings me back to low self-worth, and then my mind tells me that I have to use something to feel better. That's the hardest part about someone who has an addictive.
So can you just, in your words, just define addiction for me? Yeah,
and so the best way is to tell you that a man named Bill Wilson wrote a book. It was released 85 years ago now, 1939. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous, and in there, a doctor outlines what is called the allergy. And today we know it as a disease, alcoholism. But what's interesting is that they nailed it 85 years ago and tried to explain it to the public. And what ended up happening with that book is that people with addiction read it, but they really thought everybody would read it. Can you imagine, like back in the day, that was right after Prohibition and all sorts of things that were all started because people had these problems, right? They thought at the time, this was the guy who wrote this, the doctor that wrote this thought at the moment that if you were a chronic alcoholic, that you were doomed. There was nothing he could do for you, period. Nothing. You were a unique, standalone individual. And then Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith came out and wrote this book and released it to the public. And the doctor said, it seems like you two have a cure that I could never achieve. But the part that I really want to focus on today is that they talked about an allergy. So do you have any allergies at all?
I have started to. Gianni has allergies, and my allergies as an adult are, and we're talking about allergies like pollen. I just started getting that.
Right.
But Johnny's allergic to, I think, like anything that has a nut.
Okay. Yeah.
But he was my only family child. My wife didn't have any. I started to get just pollen now, but I didn't have any.
And I have friends, right, that are allergic to shellfish. I have one that's allergic to strawberries. Like Gianni, I have a friend who is allergic to peanuts, any type of nuts. And what happens to them is on those substances, let's just call them that, right? They have a abnormal reaction, meaning we can all, you and I can eat all the lobster we want, but when my friend eats lobster, he literally blows up. I mean, it's life-threatening to him. He has to get to a doctor or to a pharmacy to combat this abnormal reaction. No matter what Gianni does, he'll always be, without any, let's talk about without any wonder drugs, he will always be have an abnormal reaction to peanuts of some sort. And it can be dangerous, right? Extrapolate that to what this doctor was trying to say in 85 years ago is that when I take any type of mood-altering chemical, especially alcohol or drugs, into my system, I have an abnormal reaction. My brain works differently than yours. That's what I really want you to understand at this moment. It's the only way we can move forward is because so many times you look at your own drinking casually, out having friends, maybe even use it as some stress relief, maybe use it as a way to just enhance your mood, those types of things. When I use alcohol, I go back to that very first time when I was 12. It changes who I am. And my brain tells me the abnormal reaction I have is that I want more and more and more. That's the problem. Above all else, right? So you, maybe, let's just talk about this. Maybe somebody had a DUI, right? They had a really bad night. They drank too much. They blacked out. They got in their car. They drove down the street, and they got pulled over by the police. That doesn't make them an alcoholic or a drug addict. What does is that because that person might wake up the next morning and go, whoa.
What did I do?
What did I do? They have remorse. They have all of this stuff, and they go, I can't ever let this happen again. And they regulate it. They understand, meaning they never really had a problem. They just had a problem that day. For people that have alcoholism or drug addiction and their mind works like mine, when we wake up the next day after that happening, we might feel remorseful. Sure we do. Same as everybody else. We might understand that it's bad for us. But in the back of our mind, while that chemical's in us, we still have this abnormal reaction that we want more and more and more. So every day that goes by, it might be like, I'm just going to have one beer on a Friday night with my friends, right? And you put that alcohol back in your body or the drug back into your body, and all bets are off. Because once it's in you, we have this obsession to have more and more and more, regardless of the consequences. And that's the hardest part, right? Because anyone who doesn't have this problem is thinking of people in their life that do. And they're trying to say, why does he do this? Or why does she do this? Over and over. They lost their job. They lost their kids. They lost their wife. They lost their all sorts of things, but they still do it over and over and over. And you look at it and go, what is this? And the biggest part I can tell you right now is when you define it as an allergy, it doesn't matter what Gianni does. He's always going to have a problem with peanuts.
Sure.
You can't change what's in him. It's just done. You can't change what's in me either, or the person you love that's going through this. And to acknowledge that is what I'd like you to just think about, right?
It's humanizing the disease. And you can't. I think some people have had a stigma about it, which you should not. What I want to ask you is, you're saying, when I was thinking about what you were saying, so 12 years old, you have your first drink, and you got that sense of, I'm bulletproof. I feel different than I ever have, and I love it. And you said you started chasing it. How, if you would like to share it, how bad did it get, Jim? Because the Jimmy Doyle I know, when you told me some of your background, I would have never, ever thought this of you.
Well, when I was, put it this way, I got my license at 16 years old, 7 days after my 16th birthday.
Okay.
Right? And between 16 and 18, I could only legally drive my car 3 of those months.
Why?
Because my addiction got me in trouble. I got pulled over by the police. I totaled a car when I was 16 years old, put 3 people in the hospital.
So
all
when
things
in
that I
through
am
grades,
not proud of today.
high school, Parkside, you're drinking heavily.
Yes. But I can remember I was a really good runner back in Parkside, meaning I could run the mile faster than anybody in our school, right? It was just one of those things I happened to be good at. I wasn't great at the quarter. Johnny would blow right by me, or the McClure boys, but if it was the mile, I could do it 4 times in a row, right? And I would literally leave with a couple friends to go jogging after school, like part of the track team or whatever it is, cross country, whatever I was doing, jog to somebody's house and we'd go have a beer. Like, who does that? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people do that just in normal behavior. But for me, it was a purposeful thing, right? I still felt less than. I still felt like I couldn't fit in without it. And the more I put that in my system, the better I felt. And it relieved that more and more and more in my mind, that abnormal reaction, right?
So is there a point in your life, at this point, you don't know that I have this issue. I'm just drinking and I'm having fun and I'm a reckless teenager, but I'm still in control. When does it get out of control? Is there a rock bottom? Is there an epiphany moment in your head?
So I got sober at 22 years old, finally. And I've been sober today for 34 years. That's including all mood-altering chemicals, drugs, alcohol, the whole world. Because
you did everything.
I didn't just drink alcohol. I did whatever was in front of me at the time. I often say that I'm glad back then opioids weren't something you could get, because when I got sober, I had a bunch of other drugs, prescription drugs, in my cabinet that I would take along with alcohol, because it would take me to a farther place. And if I swear anybody that is suffering right now from or has a child or someone with an opioid addiction, God, I'm glad I didn't have that piece of it back then, because it wasn't available. But I was 22 years old, and what really brought me to my knees, Michael, was at 22, I had a car that didn't have any dents. I had a job. I had a future and goals that I was working for. But when I looked in the mirror, I wanted to put a gun to my head, literally. That's what it brought me to. And that is the only reason I was able to get sober, is that I hit my bottom because I hated life outwardly. You were talking about earlier, I seemed like I had it all together. Inwardly, I was a mess. And not just a mess as in having difficulties, but I gave up. I was done. I literally wanted to leave this earth. I hated life. And I got an opportunity through some friends that got in trouble and had to go into AA, and one by one they disappeared. They did what they were supposed to do, or what they're taught to do in the beginning. Stop hanging around with the people that you're drinking with. You're 23 years old, 22 years old. Go, hang around with these people. Learn how to deal with your problem before you get back into society like that. But I had one friend who, I've described this earlier, some people get in trouble who aren't alcoholics or druggists. They don't have this problem.
Bad decision.
And that was him. And he would go and then come back and be able to have a beer with me and be a normal guy, right? But he told me enough about the other two that I was attracted to it, because I told you, I was at my end. I needed something to help me. I knew there was a problem, but I didn't know it was alcohol. I really didn't. I didn't think it was alcohol. I thought I was crazy. I really did. And then I come in and I meet all these people.
Now, do you go to an AA? I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you go to an AA meeting I'm going to go to an AA meeting.
Friday night, 8 o'clock, Westlake, Ohio. I drive up with that friend of mine to go to my first AA meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I just walk into it, and it wasn't like it was an epiphany or anything like that. I can't remember what someone talked that night. I can't remember what they said, but I do remember this: as I walked in, and there were 6 people I knew from my past, people I had worked with, people I went to school with, and all of them made me feel welcome. Right.
So that first meeting, are you sober from that day on, or are you relapsing? And
no, I actually read a daily reflection book. It's dated, so every day you know what page to read. And it helps you focus and keep your mind on the improvements you want to make in your life. And so I used that book, and on the date it came in, it was like 1989 of probably June or something. It says last drink. I just wrote it down to remind myself, hey, this is it. I didn't commit myself.
Okay.
You turn a couple pages and it says final drink. I had to, and then you turn it 2 weeks later.
This is your journal.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, right. This is just me writing on the top of this book
Okay.
that I'm reading every day. And if you do it for a couple months, it keeps changing. The date keeps changing. I mean, I didn't walk in and able to just stop like that. I had to learn. I had to cope. Remember, my mind's still telling me, you're not worth it. You need this, or hey, you got 2 months. You're doing really well. So, you can have a cheat day. Things like that are all going through my head. So what it meant is that if you look in the book, it repeats itself all the way up until February 20th, 1990. And it says sobriety date on that date in the book. And that was the last time I ever had a drink or a drug. And the difference in that day is that the night before, I was sitting at a bar, and I was not feeling well mentally. And I had a beer in front of me for probably 20 minutes, not drinking it. And I said to myself, that drink is going to make you feel better, right? And I kept fighting it. And somebody that I knew who was a hostess at this place came up and goes, hey, I thought you didn't drink. And I go, today I do. And I drank it down and immediately said, tequila. Because that was my jam back then, right?
Wow.
And I woke up the next, so at that moment I had no defense, right? I couldn't stop myself. Right by myself. The next morning I woke up and I had all sorts of experiences. Nothing legally, but like I knew I couldn't drive my car, so I had to leave my car at the bar. I was smart enough not to get behind the wheel at this point, right? I just things like that. So the next day I was able to go, oh, you're an alcoholic. You can't even have one drink, right? You cannot do it. If you do it, something changes inside of your mind and tells you want more and more and more until I'll lose everything.
So, Jimmy, something I have read on addiction is that there are 4 elements of someone identifying if they're an addict, or identifying if you have a friend or family member is an addict. And I think it's called the 4 C's. And what that is compulsion, cravings, consequences, and control. And touching on each one, you have a compulsion for drug and alcohol. You seek it out over anything else.
And that goes in line with what we just talked about,
Exactly.
right? My allergy comment, and once it's in your system, you want more and more of it.
You have the cravings. No matter what, you're craving alcohol.
When it's in your system,
it's in your system. You
can't.
have to have it.
Mm-hmm. And
drugs, alcohol, it's got to have it. And the consequences, and you hit on this. No matter what happens, what the outcome could be of a bender or a blackout, you still will go and seek out alcohol or drugs, regardless of the consequences.
Yeah.
And then the final one, control, is they're just unable to stop. Mm-hmm. So have you ever heard about that? Or, pretty much what you taught, without saying the 4 C's, you pretty much touched on all of those.
And no, I've never heard that exact way you're describing it, but I agree with it. It helps us to identify. So imagine, I just got done talking about how difficult it is for an individual to figure out if they are or aren't an alcoholic. Remember, I told you not everybody that has a problem
is an alcoholic.
They just aren't. I know that from experience. Does it lean them towards it? Yes. So how does somebody who is a parent or a wife or husband or a partner or, dealing with somebody, how did they figure out if this person has it? Because right, let's just talk real quick about, hey, how do we get better at business? How do we get better at school? When you don't have this problem, it's all like, hey, just get up every day and do this. Get up, like you put all of these goals in your life, and that's easy, right? If it was that easy to get over addiction, none of us would be having a conversation about it right now, right? It's very hard to figure out if you have this or you don't. I have had people come up to me, Michael, and say, I think I might have a problem. And I can tell you that it's usually a neighbor or a friend. And most of the time in the back of my mind, I'm going, they don't have a problem, because they don't come and ask me. If you're asking, you probably, because if you're really in it, you don't want to tell anybody, right? You don't want to just talk about it. And what I mean by that is someone might say, well, every day at 4:00, I drink wine. And I do it every single day, all the time. And I go, are you able to stop afterwards? Yeah. And I go, occasionally, can you get an interruption by your daughter or something and go take care of it? Oh, yeah. The 4 C's, they can get by it. And I'm like, chances are you don't have a problem, right? Personally, I'd like them to see them try to stop, not because they're addicted to it, but because what could their quality of life be if they didn't have to depend on that to get through the end of the day? Things like that. You can enhance who you are, regardless if you're an alcoholic, by having some control. And a person that doesn't have my mind can control it like that while they're in it. If you have the problem, though, how do you can't touch it until you get it out of your system, right? So that's what's difficult, I think, for somebody who's looking at it.
I have something I would love for you to talk to me about. How does one's family, friends, deal with someone they love with an addiction that addict has not come to grips with their
untreated addiction?
Yes. How do they?
People with treated addiction, you can be however you want.
It's untreated.
No, I wouldn't continuously tell an alcoholic, hey, why aren't you having a drink? Blah blah blah. So there's that. But if they are active in their addiction and you're trying to help them, so a family member, a friend, I have personally helped and had conversations with fathers or mothers who had children with this opioid addiction that's going all over the place, right? And unfortunately, opioids and fentanyl have killed, believe it or not, more people than all of Vietnam and Iraq.
I didn't know that. I knew it was crazy.
It's crazy, right? I mean, and it's still a problem today, even though it's not on the front page news. But what I mean by that is, and this is the hardest thing in the world, Michael, is I love my kids. I would do anything for them, right? When I'm helping somebody else, they're not my kids, right? I can detach and look at it. But when it's your children or your mother or your father or anyone that you love, man, you would do anything for them. And you got to start asking yourself, is that the right thing for the person? Remember, they've got to get to the point where it's out of their system long enough that they can address it. Once if it's depending on the drug, it could take weeks to get it out of your system, right? Alcohol really fast, right? Some linger longer. So how do they get to that point if we're constantly propping them up, right? And that's the hard part. I have helped in those families. I have had, and I say this with compassion, right? I've had fathers who have lost their child because of his addiction. Can you imagine?
Mm-mm.
And I've had fathers who have watched their children have the same addiction but get out on the other side and be sober, productive members of society today. What's the difference between the actions? It could be the same. That's the problem, is you have very little control over it as a father or as a loved one. But if you are the one that's constantly giving them money and shelter and everything else around the addiction, that's enabling them to continue, right? So I always say, this is the hardest part as a family member, is you have to be willing at some point to cut it off, to stop helping, to not prop them up. And the results of that could be that the addicted person goes through their cycle and is no longer with us. Or they go through their cycle and hit their own bottom and they realize that they can now get to the other side because they found it in their own heart without being propped up that it's bad enough and I'm done, right? How do you tell that to a parent that knows that the person might overdose and die?
You can't.
But I'm telling you, that end result, you're not going to control. So make your decision up front, which is, I gotta let it go and have some faith, right? And however your spirituality is, or, that this is going to be the right decision. But to do that as a parent, I can only imagine. It's easy for me to say. It's really hard to do, right? And anyone who's in this problem will understand what I'm talking about.
I would imagine that this is with anyone that, like, if you're trying to help someone, okay, and you're helping them, the parents are trying to help them. I have heard this, that, and I think it was Robert Downey Jr. that said this, that he had so many people trying to help him before he hit rock bottom, and it wasn't until he decided that I'm ready. Mm-hmm. I'm ready to become sober. That he could, no matter what anyone did, until he was ready to be sober, he couldn't get sober. Mm-hmm. And once he was ready and committed in his mind, I think he said that the rest of it was easy. Mm-hmm. The part that he struggled with is, I'm not ready. And I would imagine that you have seen tons of people like that, or maybe you probably were. Obviously, from our conversation, you were there.
Yeah, I mean, how easy is it for me to go, oh, my brother doesn't have this problem. He can have his fancy. Remember, it's been 34 years, but his fancy beers, the word around when I was doing this, and just set it down. Our addictive mind says, oh, mm-hmm. I can be like them. And then that thought turns into, just give it a shot. And then guess what? I'm divorced. I've lost my job. I lost my license. My kids don't talk to me. All of those things are where it happens. So like Robert Downey Jr. that you just mentioned, he's absolutely right. He's got to come to a point where he can see it. And that's what I'm talking about. You can't do it while it's in your system. So great things to encourage people is to go to detox at least, right? Get it out of your system, because you get to a point as an addict that when I say addict, I mean everything, that you can't stop. If you're in this society, you're constantly picking it up the next day, over and over. You have to shut it down. Some people that's required. Now, some people, they don't require that, but I love having a place to go to and do that. Also, treatment centers, right? And everyone says, like, well, I could take a week off. Oh, is a week going to do it? No, most of them are 30 days, 30 right? Days. You really got to shut down, because we want to get to the other side with a clear mind for you to objectively on your own look at your own behavior and understand it. And you've got to be on the other side.
So you do hear people that go through these treatment centers and they'll do the 30 days and they come out and they use, whether it's alcohol or drugs again. So that's back to that mindset that they're just not ready yet.
I say this all the time. Remember I said, it doesn't matter if you're 30 days or 30 years sober. There's a certain things you have to do all the time to be able to stay sober. And if you don't learn them in the 30 days, all you learn is that, okay, I have an addiction. If it was simple enough for us to just say, okay, I have this addiction, I know I have it now, I'm done, then everybody would go for 30 days and come out and never relapse. But it doesn't work that way, right? It's a constant mental battle. And so you need tools in your life after that 30 days. And the more you learn in that 30 days about the tools, the support from other people, the identification of what you're doing wrong, not just what, but why you do it. Why do you continually do this? And then constantly talking to people about it until you can get to the other side where I'm at and look at it objectively. And it's no longer this constant battle every single day, but it's still something I have to keep in check, right? I do, and I love doing it. That's the other part.
So, you're 34 years sober, okay? Has there been a person through your sobriety that has been like your rock that has helped you?
Well, first off, my wife, right, Jenny. She's just, I always say that she wakes up in the morning and loves life. And when she married me, even though I was sober for 3 years, I would still wake up in the morning, and while I was no longer hating life, I had to remind myself I loved it.
Are those feelings gone today, Jimmy?
Yeah, today I wake up and I just love
You love life.
Man. I love everything about it. I have found a purpose in my life that is unimaginable, Just I say this to people, but the two best days in someone's life is the day that they're born, and the second one is the day that they realize why. And to me, that is what we're talking about today.
And this is your why.
It is.
So I know a big part of sobriety with people that have done it as long as you have is they mentor people in programs. I think you call it sponsors.
Yeah.
Is that a part of your life, daily life, weekly, monthly?
It is. And so over 34 years, it's changed where I've had, maybe one person a year that I'm helping. And then there was other times in my life where it was continuous, right? COVID was a big, for me, was very interesting, right? So I started being able to work from home. You couldn't get out, so it really disrupted a lot of recovery efforts because people couldn't get together anymore, right? It was hard for people. I hate to say this because I don't want to downplay people who lost people because of COVID, right? But COVID for me was outstanding. I had, believe it or not, over the 3-year period of time of COVID, I had 22 people ask me for help in this program, right, of addiction. And I was, for a year and a half, I spent 2 hours a day at my home with somebody else every day of the week, 2 people on Saturdays and Sundays for a year and a half, and I never stopped. And people would say, how did you do that at work? You know, how did you do that and have kids and a wife and everything else? When you're doing something that you love, when you're actually helping somebody in a way that is a way that we never really get a chance to, when a big burly guy who's overcoming his addiction comes up and says, I love you, man, and gives you a hug, that's the reward, right? And I entered a state of just simple bliss, Michael. And
That's so beautiful.
And I am no longer, I don't leave it. I mean it. And I don't want to sound like, oh, I got this all, you know, like my life's all perfect and put together. I still have challenges in my life, but I know how to act and react. I know how to use the tools in my life to still overcome difficulties so that it doesn't, as simple as, put it this way, Michael, I had an opportunity in my life with 4 other friends to start a nonprofit. It's called the Primary Purpose Center. It's in Sheffield and Ohio. And all of us equally contributed to this. But for myself, I was a full-time employee with my regular job and starting a 501(c) nonprofit from scratch on a very, very limited budget, which is hard to do. And I did that for 4.5 years nonstop, almost like a second full-time job. It was the hardest thing I ever had done in my life. And again, didn't do it on my own. 4 people did this with me, and we all contributed. And but at the time, all I wanted to do, and the reason I was doing it is I love helping people in this way, and I wanted something that would outlive me. Right?
Wow.
Something that would, no matter what happened to me, if I could do this or not, would still do what I like to do. And I go, well, that's easy. Let's just go do it. Well, when you start that, you have to go, okay, how are you? So we got help from a place called the Lakota Way, which is another charity that helped us so much. The Nord Family Foundation helped us so much, giving us, income to be able, or grants to be able to use. And the state of Ohio helped us. And it grew it into a place that had 5 locations, helping both men and women, serving 3 meals a day to everybody, providing them shelter and a place that they could stay for 30 to 90 days. And that it was all free for everybody that wanted to come. And that was just beautiful. But from that, I want you to say that it wasn't all roses, right? I saw over 30 people die of this addiction because of that. People I knew, not people I was helping, like I was just talking about individually, but just people at the location, and others. And it took a toll on me, right? I never started this. I'm not a clinician in alcoholism, right? I'm just a guy who's sober that has had 34 years of experience and can help somebody in that. I never went to run this place. When I left it with a 9-member board. It had income. It had money in the bank and a director to run it, and I could walk away, right? And when I did that, I started saying to myself, how could I be better at this? Meaning I lost 35 people. And sometimes when you're helping somebody, you start at, remember, I'm distant from it, but sometimes we say, oh, they just didn't want it, or it wasn't their time. Meaning we're not looking inward at it because we have to. If you want to survive this heartache, right, you can't take it personally. But I started looking inward and saying, how could I do this better, right? How could I get better at what I'm doing? And so I got, so I focused on changing who I am, Michael. And I say this to people all the time, and they always think it's crazy. but I have not honked the horn in my car for 5 years. Why is that
Why?
important? Yeah, why is that
Why?
important? Well, because honking the horn, right, is anger. Correct? I mean, we get in the car and somebody cuts us
Road
off.
rage.
And then we're like, oh, I got to fix that guy. The person that cut me off, I need them to know that they hurt me. Today, well, maybe that person just wasn't paying attention. Maybe that person is running to the hospital. Maybe, I try to look at what that person might do. And me honking the horn, I can't change them, but I can change me in the way I react to life. So that, if just not honking my horn, can what? Make me a better father, be more patient, not yell, be a better husband, listen when my wife comes home, pay attention to her, not demean people. It's so easy for us to be. I think we're the hardest on our families, the people we love, than anybody else. You wouldn't come to work and treat sometimes how we treat our families. Those things I wanted to change about myself. Why? Because I wanted to help somebody else do the same thing. Remember, addiction isn't just about setting down whatever is bothering you. You need to change who you are and understand why you do this and become a better person. Why? Because that leads us away from anger, resentment, fear, frustration, envy, all of those things you need to figure out in your life, or else they will all lead you to addiction. I wanted to figure them all out in my life so that I could help somebody else become a better person, period, right? And I was blessed. And from that, I wrote this book called The Sobriety Meter. TheSobrietyMeter.com is the website, right?
Okay.
And you can find the book, The Sobriety Meter, on Amazon. And you could reach out if you want to write it down. You could reach out to Jimmy at 11 Jimmy Doyle at Gmail.
There you go.
And I didn't write that because I was hoping to become a #1 novelist. I didn't write it for profit or gain. I wrote it because sobriety is difficult, no matter what you're doing, and I wanted to look at these people and say, how could I help them? So I had, for example, whenever somebody would relapse, I'd go up to them and ask them a question, right? It used to be I would just say, hey, why'd you relapse? And most people will go, I stopped doing this, or I stopped doing that, or and I finally realized it isn't the moment of when they relapse. The question is, what were you doing 2 weeks before? And most of the time, nothing is the answer, right? They weren't doing the things that keep them sober today. They stopped doing them, and they didn't even realize it. Some of the hardest times for an alcoholic or a drug addict to stay sober is after they get sober a couple of years.
Because they just don't know what to do with themselves?
Well, no, they're normal people just like you. Outwardly, everything's great, right? So that's a really bad thing for somebody who, if they have one or two, drinks or a drug, jump off a cliff, right? It's very hard. So this whole book was designed just to help people be able to count and manage what they're doing in their life. And it's specifically for people that are already in this, right? They already have the tools. And I'm not pumping the book for that reason.
No,
I just wanted to provide something, I don't need a pat on the back. I don't need a plaque on the wall. I just want to give of my time.
So if anyone has questions with what they're going through, send you an email. You're going to reach out to them and answer.
Yes, yeah, and we'll figure that out. I'm also starting a online presence, which is called Anonymous Help. It'll be released within the next month. My hope is that I can show people, regular people like yourself, how they can continue to help others. I really want people to feel the way I feel, that helping people is a really good thing and that we all have time to do it. And I know, we'll hold the door open for somebody, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about really helping somebody with your experience, because we all have our own experiences and we all have some expertise because of that experience. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Doing something like this and all the selfless acts of you helping these people get to where they want to be sober. that has to do something besides what it does inside. It's got to help with you working on your sobriety for the next level.
Yes,
right?
It ensures
It ensures your sobriety.
It really does.
So, yeah, I know there's clinics for this and what you do and doctors, but you walk the walk. I think that you have to have people just resonate with you because you've done it.
What I find pretty crazy is it doesn't matter if you have an addiction or not. Everybody wants to have a better relationship with their family. Everybody wants to work harder and obtain things without it pulling them down, right? Mm-hmm. To learn that balance. Everybody wants to love their children without be worried about them all the time. So when I'm when I'm out there with regular people, meaning someone who doesn't have a mind like mine, typically all the things I do to help my mind also can help them. And that's what's really cool, right? Is you relate to this. You want to be a better person every single day. That's why you're doing this podcast. You want to help people. That's why you're doing this podcast. You are a person that really wants to do that, and you love doing it, right? The more you're on this, I think you're probably finding out that wow, I'm good at this. I like to do it, and look at you. You've already been successful in other areas. Now you're going to be more. You find more success in that, and isn't that the thing? I say it all the time, but all I want to be is helpful. That's it. I mean, it's a pretty low bar when you just say it, I just want to be helpful, right? And that brings peace. It brings peace. I don't have to have a gazillion dollars, right? I don't have to have a perfect life. All I want is my inner heart and the people around me to know that I love them and that I care about them. And to me, that makes us successful at everything else we do.
You've been, you're so inspirational. I usually end it with asking people, what's your blueprint, man? And your blueprint is just beautiful. Yeah. I don't know if you could elaborate any more on it because everything you've touched on is your blueprint for your life, man. And you walk the walk.
I hope today, tell you the truth, what I hope that people heard today is that, let's talk about two things. So I hope everybody heard that somebody who has a mind like mine, addicted personality, is different than them. That would help, right? Because then you're not just looking at someone you love and going, hey, just pull up those bootstraps and go do it. That's not helping, right? It's not helping somebody. Be compassionate. Understand that a person who's addicted is actually a very sick person. You wouldn't treat somebody with cancer, and say, oh, come on, just go do your chemo and get it. No, man, we're compassionate about it. The problem with addiction is that it messes not just the person's life up, but everybody else's. And I don't want to ignore that, right? Because there's been horrible things that have come from this. People have lost their lives, and it's really hard to forgive, and it's really hard to look at people and have compassion for them when they're a certain type of person. But the more we can do that and see that they're different, the better it is. And then I'd like anyone who's listening who's on the edge to say to them, you can't figure it out while you're using. So if you really want to know if you have a problem, stop, cut it off, and then see what happens from there. Are you able to function? Are you angry, discontent, irritable? Those are reasons, right, for you to go, oh, maybe I got something going here, right? Is it easy? Is it hard? I believe nobody who is truly addicted can do anything like 6 months to a year without using their drug. They just can't. So think longer term when you're trying to test yourself. It's not 2 days,
right?
And I'd like anyone also to understand that you can have a messed up mind like mine, right? An addictive personality, and have a beautiful life without that chemical in your life. I don't miss anything of that old life. I can go out. I went out to dinner with you the other night, and
Right.
your beautiful wife, and I loved it, and I contributed, and I remembered everything about it, and I wasn't hungover the next day, and it was beautiful, right? I can have a beautiful life today and have a messed up mind. So I hope everybody hears that. Give them some encouragement that they too can do this.
Jimmy, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Everything you've said has been so inspirational. I haven't had to say much because I've been so engrossed in listening to this conversation. And if you notice, I'm just like, keep going, keep going. I got a crazy question, and this is totally off topic, something I've never said before. If you could pick up that phone and call the 20 or 22-year-old Jimmy Doyle, what'd you say to him?
I'd tell him what I just said. If you, I'd say this. I'd say nothing you are doing today has created this problem, right? It wasn't how much I drank in high school or the man who gave me a beer when I was 12. It wasn't his fault.
You don't blame that guy?
I do not at all. You don't know till you put it in your system. I told that to my kids when they were young. Like, the longer you can wait, the better off you're going to be, right? So if you're in high school, the longer you can not drink or use drugs, the better off you'll be. Why? Because I don't know if you're going to have a mind like mine. And the older you are, like, hey, get through college, get through your trade, get your life together before you really, figure this out, right? Because it's hard as a 22-year-old man to get sober, right? Sometimes it's harder than a 52-year-old man to get sober.
Sure.
Because
you got your whole life ahead of you.
Well, and younger ages party harder, right? We just do. I mean, you and I, we get tired at 9:00 today. We didn't when we were in high school, right?
Right.
So I would tell that young man that all you have to do is I would tell Jimmy Doyle that you have some problems right now, but the end of it is going to be better than you could ever imagine, right? Give him some hope.
So if you remember what I said at the beginning of the conversation with all that we just talked about, what I told you is anything of your new endeavor of getting back into real estate is will be easy for someone like you to challenges. Come on, look what you've overcome.
Yeah.
There's got to be that mental makeup in your head. There's nothing I can't do. I can do this.
I can do that. But let me say this, is the cool thing about real estate, and you know this, Michael, is we help people all the time.
You help people all the time.
And guess what? I know how to serve today. And I'm not afraid to say that, meaning I don't have ego that I have to be the this perfect person. I want to go to anybody who is trying to sell their property and serve them.
Yeah.
That's it, and I'm going to serve them the same way I serve anybody with everything else. Life gives us those opportunities, right? And that's what I'm talking about, just helping somebody. We help people all the time, and if you're sitting around and you're wondering how you could help somebody, knock on a neighbor's door who is alone, that probably isn't feeling great. That would help them, right? There's so many things that we can do today, just simple things, right? That don't take money, They just take a little of your time and your heart. And
well, this has been so refreshing just speaking with you on all these topics, because the way the world is today, and people aren't always – there are good people in the world, but you just see so much hatefulness going on today with everything that's going on in the world, and people are so caught up in their own life. And then to talk with someone like you that you get it and you're there for other people.
I'm really careful today, Michael, what comes into my mind, right? What I allow into my mind. And if all you're doing is watching negative things, guess what? Your outlook on life will be negative. I control what comes in. I mean that. And so to find a beautiful world, you got to participate, right? Now, I can walk out the door today and nobody's attacking me. Yeah. It's a beautiful day, and I have an opportunity to help somebody. And if you have that mindset, man, life is not as hard as it seems, right?
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Make sure to follow us on social media at MDV The Blueprint on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We post a ton of great content. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you never miss out on an episode. Thanks again, and see you next time.